Welcome back to Spooky Stories. For the next 10 days leading up to Halloween, I'll be sharing spooky stories, but not always spooky, from books within the collections at Seton Hall University, along with the strange and sometimes just downright weird of collections. I hope you enjoy. And it is day 10 of Spooky Stories, the last day, and you know what that means. Happy Halloween! Here is another story I'm going to share that was already shared, but it's just too good not to reshare every year. This is the legend of the Jack-o'-the-Lantern. Once upon a time, there lived a man whose natural disposition was churlish and morose, and the asperities of whose soul had not been softened down by the influence of a knowledge of God. And his acquirements in the things of this world did not much exceed the narrow skill which enabled him to cultivate the farm on which he lived. He was known throughout the country for his unsocial manners. His blazing hearth never cheered the wayworn stranger, and the repulsed beggar never again saw his inhospitable door. In short, he lived the reproach of humanity, and his name was a byword in the land. Jack, for so this churl was named, was returning home one night from a neighboring fair when, as he approached a dark and rapid stream at a particular ford, which the imagination of the people of that time had associated with some tales of murder and superstition, he heard a groan that, to his fancy, proceeded from some tortured spirit. He suddenly drew in on the mare on which he rode. All the horrid tales recorded of that dark glen rushed to his memory, and as a second and a third sound of agony smote his ear, his bristling hair stood erect. The cold beads of dismay oozed at every pore, nor did the whiskey which he had quaffed that evening in his own sordid way prevent the current of blood from freezing at his very heart. But when the horrid sounds were again repeated, he summoned nerve sufficient to inquire what he could do for the tortured soul that crossed his path in that glen of gloom and horror. "For the love of heaven," said the voice, "take me to some human habitation, for I am no tortured spirit, but a poor, homeless wanderer, who have lost my way on the wild moor, and have laid down here to die, for I durst not cross this rapid water. So may mercy be shown to you in your hour of need, and in the day of your distress." Delivered from supernatural terrors, the peasant's soul softened into humanity. With an indescribable feeling of pity, which never till that hour reached his heart, he dismounted, and saw, extended on the damp earth, a very aged man, with a white beard, who was evidently borne down with the load of years and misery. He wrapped the aged sufferer in his warm greatcoat, placed him on the saddle, and then mounted on the crupper. He supported the object of his pity till he reached home. His wife smiled to behold her gruff husband engaged in the unusual office of hospitality, and wondered much what charm could have soothed his unsocial soul to kindness. The miserable stranger received every necessary that her cupboard afforded, was laid to rest in a warm bed, and in short time his grief and infirmities were forgotten in sound repose. About the dawn of day, Jack was awakened from his sleep by a bright blaze of light that shone through all the cabin. Unable to account for this sudden illumination, he started to his feet from the bed, when his progress was instantly checked, and his astonishment greatly augmented, to behold a young man of celestial beauty wrapped in white garments. His shoulders were furnished with wings, the plumage of which exceeded in whiteness the down of swans, and as he spoke, his words stole like the notes of a heavenly harp to the soul of the wondering cottager. "Whortle," said the celestial visitant, "I am one of the angels commissioned to watch over the sons of Adam. I heard thy brethren exclaim against thy unsocial temper, and utter disregard of the sacred virtue of hospitality. But I find that some generous seeds of virtue have lain uncultivated with thee. In me thou beholdst the miserable senior whom thy generous humanity relieved. I have shared thy frugal fare and lowly bed. My blessings shall remain with thy house, but to thyself in particular I bestow 3 wishes. Then freely ask, as I shall freely give. My wisdom bound the desire of thy soul." Jack paused for a moment, and then said, "There's a sycamore tree before the door, fair and wide-spreading, but every passer-by must pluck a bough from it. Grant that everyone touching it with such intent may cling to the tree till I release him. Secondly, I do wish that any person who sits in my elbow chair may never be able to leave it, nor the chair to leave the ground without my consent. There's a wooden box on the wall. I keep it to hold the thread, the awls, and hammer with which I mend my brogues. But the moment I turn my back, every clown comes here cobbling for himself. My third request is that the person who puts his hand into the box might not withdraw it, and that the box may stick to the wall during my pleasure. My wishes are ended. The angel sighed as he granted the boon, and the legend further adds that Jack, from that hour, was excluded from all hope of heaven because he had eternal happiness within his wish and neglected to secure the vast gift. But the angel's blessings remained with his house, his children were many, and his crops and cattle throve with large increase. And 20 years after, as Jack sat one evening in his elbow chair, musing on his earthly affairs, a strange and unearthly smell of brimstone assailed his nose. And when he turned round to ascertain the cause, the appearance of a tall, dark-looking being, graced with a pair of horns, a cloven foot, and a long tail, which he carried rather jauntily tucked under his arm, further increased his astonishment. The stranger immediately opened his message, mentioned Jack's exclusion from heaven, and spoke of his infernal master's anxiety to see him speedily at his own hot home. When Jack heard these awful tidings, he repressed every symptom of alarm, and starting to his feet bid the stranger welcome. I hope, he continued, your honor won't be above sitting in the elbow chair and tasting a drop of poteen this cold evening, as while I put on my Sunday clothes. The demon complied. There, said his host, is a real drop of the native. The Sora-odd gauger ever set his ugly face on. Why, then, would your honor tell me if ye have any gaugers in your native place? We have lots of them, replied he of the cloven hoof, but we give them other employment than still hunting. But come, the road is long and we must away. So saying, he motioned to leave his seat, but found himself immovably fixed therein, while the guileful mortal set his flail to work on his captive enemy. Vain every entreaty for mercy, in vain he kicked and flung his arms around. The swift descending instrument of vengeance smashed every bone in his skin. And it was only when exhausted and unable to prosecute his task that he consented to liberate the miserable being on his solemn oath that he would never more visit the upper world on a similar errand. Satan had more than one courier to do his errands. A second messenger, provided with the necessary instruction for shunning the fatal chair and flail, was dispatched to fetch the doomed mortal who was ruminating next day on the adventure of the preceding evening, when the latch was raised and a stranger cautiously entered. When he had explained his business, Jack requested that he would be seated, and expressed his willingness to depart when he had put a stitch or two in his old brogue. The courier was too cautious, and declined to sit. But Jack took the chair, pulled off his broken shoe, requested the demon to hand him the awl from the box. The infernal visitant obeyed, but found that he could neither withdraw his hand nor remove the box from the wall. He cast a glance of dismay at his mortal antagonist, who sprung to the flail and bestowed such discipline as forced the present visitor to submit to the same conditions for his release that his brother devil had done. It is said that his sable majesty was greatly surprised at the discomfiture of his two trusty messengers, and like a skillful general, he resolved to go in person and explore the enemy's camp. He ascended from the netherworld, through Mangerton Mountain near Killarney, where that barren and bottomless pool called the Hole of Hell now fills up the funnel which formed his upward passage. He looked around from the lofty height into the far country, with the sagacity of a vulture in quest of his prey, directed his course to Jack's habitation. It was a sunny morning, and a heavy frost of some days' continuance had congealed all the waters, and rendered the surface of the land hard and slippery. Aware of Jack's wiles, he rapped at the door, and in a voice of thunder bid the miserable mortal come forth. I will go whithersoever your lordship commands me, he answered, awed by the threatening voice and formidable manner of his summoner. but the road is slippery, and you will permit me to fetch my cane. Besides, I would wish to kiss my wife and little ones before I go." The fiend was inexorable and urged the wretched being on before him. "If I walk without the support of a stick," he resumed, hobbling on before his captor, "I shall speedily break my bones. And if there are no carmen on the road to hell, how would your lordship wish to fetch my carcase on your princely shoulders? Oh, that I had even a bough from yonder sycamore to support my poor old limbs." To stay his murmuring and furnish the desired support, Satan laid hold on a fair branch of the tree, but immediately found that he was unable either to break the bough or quit his hold. And Jack, with a yell of joy, returned to fetch his favorite flail. In the words of the legend, whoever would come from the remote ends of the earth to hear the most fearful howlings, occasioned by the most dreadful castigation, would here have ample gratification. Jack broke his 3 best flails on the occasion, and though the miserable fiend cried loudly for mercy, he continued his toil till the going down of the sun, when, on his promising neither to seek Jack on earth or permit his entrance into hell, the arch-fiend was released, and the fortunate man retired to rest, more fatigued from that day's thrashing than ever he had before. Our story draws near its close. Jack, with all his skill, could not baffle the assault of death. He paid the debt of nature, but when his soul was dismissed to its final residence, the porter at the gate of the infernal regions stoutly denied him admittance. The fiends turned pale with affright, and even Satan himself fled within the lowest depths to hide his head from the dreaded enemy. Then, because he was unfit for heaven, and that hell refused to take him, he was decreed to walk the earth with a lantern to light him on his nightly way to the day of judgment. Such, reader, is the legend relative to the Jack-o'-the-lantern, commonly believed by the peasantry in many districts of Ireland. This is a story from Irish Fireside Stories, Tales and Legends, published in New York by P.J. Kennedy in 1881. Now, unfortunately, there is not much information about this book. However, I do know that it was presented to William McConney, who wrote his name in the book, on the front and back covers, and it looks like it was a very well-used, well-read, ultimately a truly loved book that has survived at least 1 century. And just to give you all this thought, that when books are really read, used, and loved, they typically will not make it to an archives because they get read until they fall apart. It's only the books that are well used, read, loved, and are taken care of and haven't seen the test of time that do end up in an archives. But it's something to think about because there must have been a lot of books that have been published over the centuries that just didn't make it just because they were read that much. Now, this year, I did do some further research into this book, and I do believe that it was written, compiled, or edited by someone named Patrick Kennedy. Now, he was a folklorist from County Wexford, Ireland, as well as an educator, bookseller, who also contributed various articles and reviews as a writer, but ultimately became best known as a collector and publisher of Irish folktales and folklore, particularly from his native county, Wexford. Now, much like the other Irish folklore books in this year's episodes have been published around the time of the Irish literary movement, this book was near that time as well, and Kennedy himself was seen as a pioneer in uncovering Irish folkloric material. He influenced not only the movement, but also William Butler Yeats, and it is credited with preserving the way in which tales were told, the idioms, sentence structure, and even Irish words. Now, to get back to our Jack-o'-the-lantern tale, this tale is different from what seems to be a more well-known tale, or a well-known story about Stingy Jack. And the Stingy Jack tale goes on to tell how Jack tricked the devil himself 3 times. It starts out with a coin trick, where Jack convinces the devil to turn into a silver coin so Jack can pay for a round of drinks. Instead, Jack pockets the coin, trapping the devil in his pocket with a silver crucifix. Then Jack frees the devil after he agrees not to bother Jack for a year and not to claim his soul upon his death. But a year later, Jack tricks the devil again by getting him to climb an apple tree. Jack then carves a cross into the tree bark, thus trapping the devil until the devil promises not to bother him for another 10 years. Which is quite different from the tale that I told in this episode, where demons are tricked before the devil ultimately comes up himself to see what's going on. What does remain the same is Jack's eventual death and his denied entry into heaven and hell, and where he is given a coal to light his nightly way as he wanders the earth. Now, another difference too between these tales is in the tale that I told was an angel visits Jack, and that is also where his denied entry from heaven is also cemented, as opposed to just, being a trickster and then dying and being denied to hell. And also, another thing that remains somewhat the same between the two is the idea that a turnip is used and carved out to house this forever burning coal. Now, it might sound strange, as we're all used to carving pumpkins and having pumpkin gut fights, but in Ireland, root vegetables like turnips would have been the choice, as they are native to Ireland and grow more abundantly, especially during that time period. Pumpkins weren't really a part of Ireland. And I often think about the size that turnip would needed to have been. Like, they must have been pretty hefty turnips to carve out and then carve a face into, especially as the tradition went on and, people in Ireland continued this root vegetable carving tradition. Like, how big was that turnip? Unless people were just really skilled, which could have been as well, at carving out a turnip. So carving out a vegetable is not just a celebration of Halloween, but could have been the way to ward off evil spirits and even welcome people into your house. Now, looking more into the idea of carving out a root vegetable changed into carving out pumpkins, I'm guessing that it was also when the Irish came to America that they encountered pumpkins, and thus pumpkins became the ideal vegetable to carve out. As you say, much easier. If anybody's ever cut a turnip, you'd know it's a pretty difficult root vegetable to get through, as opposed to something like a pumpkin, which is a gourd and much more easier to cut and carve. But who knows? All I do know is whichever tale you choose and however you carve your root vegetable, or vegetables in general, it's about having a good time. So don't eat too much candy, stay safe, and happy Halloween. And that is it for Spooky Stories. Thank you so much for having joined me for the past 10 days. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed listening as much as I have enjoyed creating these. And if you've enjoyed this mini-series, be sure to share and follow us on social media at SHU_libraries. And until next time, until next year, as always, keep your curiosity alive. And remember, the library holds more than just books. Some stories may linger long after the lights go out.